Hello and welcome to StratNews Global. I'm Parul Chandra, and with me today is Dr. Lobsang Sangay. Dr. Sangay is the president of the Central Tibetan Administration, more commonly known as the Tibetan government in exile. Dr. Sangay, before he became president of the CTA, was the prime minister of the Tibetan government in exile. He has been spearheading the Tibetan cause for nearly a decade now, and he is also the political successor of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Welcome to StratNews Global, Dr. Sangay. Pleasure to have you with us.
Good to see you again.
Yes, we meet, I think, we met about 7 or 8 months ago, but currently we meet in very, say, in a time when ties between China and India are very tense. 20 Indian soldiers have been brutally killed by the PLA troops in eastern Ladakh, and ties seem to be spiraling downwards between New Delhi and Beijing. What do you make of the current aggressive moves by China?
Well, China has been quite aggressive at the
Yes.
border for many years now. Initially with border incursions of few hundreds to 400 to 500 now. And Doklam in 2017 was the major flashpoint where Indian and Chinese troops came face to face, right? But there was no physical violence, and at least there was no casualties. This time, so there is, casualties of, 20 Indian Jawans who died. So this is an escalation. I just feel that one thing is leading to another, and I think this will escalate more and more. That's my worry.
Yes, there is certainly escalation of the tensions, but really, do you think that this is part of Beijing's expansionist policies in the region? They have shown similar tendencies in the South China Sea. But what about these recent face-offs, say in Ladakh, in Sikkim also? What would you say to all this?
China is an empire and it has an expansionist policy. So
Yes.
Tibet was occupied, Inner Mongolia was occupied, Xinjiang was occupied, part of the expansionist policy. Now they're expanding it further, and then hence they're encroaching into Indian territories, Nepal, Bhutan, and South China Sea, East China Sea. With all the neighboring countries of China, all of them have one issue: incursion and expansion from the Chinese side towards or in the territories of all these countries. So what you see in Ladakh is part of the greater game plan of expansionist policy.
Yeah, that's right. But given that China is indulging in all this, and I did hear you speak about what Chairman Mao Tse Tung had said many years ago, when he said that China is the palm of the hand, and Ladakh, Nepal,
Yes,
Bhutan, Arunachal, and all these
Sikkim,
areas, Sikkim, yes, are all
five
the five
fingers.
fingers.
Yes,
In the light of that statement, do you see this current expansionism by China as part of the current Chinese regime's moves to really carry forward what Chairman Mao had said so many decades ago?
absolutely. I think, if you study from 1949 onwards and 1960, 62 to 67, the flashpoint at this time, the Sichuan Glacier, under the occupation of China, which was, uh, shared or given away by Pakistan, it's part of that expansionist design. So hence now 3,488 kilometers long border is there, and they're encroaching, on a daily basis into Indian territories. and it's part of their expansion. So they got the palm, now they're coming up to 5 fingers. So they will persist, and hence my worry is, this is just the beginning.
Uh, this is just the beginning. What do you think that India then needs to do to check or contain China in its expansionist moves?
Now, from military point of view, you can do certain things. You can, strengthen the military hardware by, strengthening military presence and building infrastructure in the whole border areas, whole of the Himalayan region, from Ladakh all the way to Arunachal Pradesh, right? And then you have to also strengthen the soft power, the culture, the civilization, the identity, the heritage of the Himalayan region should be respected and should be inculcated and cultivated and supported. That's very important, right? And then after all, till the issue of Tibet is resolved, I think this will continue to happen. Because for thousands of years, it was a border between India and Tibet. Now it has become border, of India and China because of occupied Tibet, and all these flashpoints, the tensions is happening. So hence, till you address the issue of Tibet, it is going to, remain as a flashpoint.
You have said in the past that they first came for Tibet and now they're coming for India. Do you think that India needs to be more aggressive in terms of countering Chinese moves in the region?
Well, India has no option because Chinese expansion is designed and incursion is not just at Ladakh, the whole of Himalayan belt. And if you look at all the neighboring countries, right? Nepal is under tremendous pressure, Bhutan is under pressure, Bangladesh under pressure, Sri Lanka, Maldives, and Pakistan is, obviously is, what they call, all-weather friend, right?
Yes.
So now India has to counter all these things, to have the status and the respect of all the neighboring countries, immediate neighboring countries, and the whole of Asia.
Dr. Sangay, now another thing that I would like to ask you is about China's One China policy. Now, India has always backed that policy. Given the current state of bilateral relations between New Delhi and Beijing, is it about time that India junked this policy?
One China policy was adopted by China for Taiwan issue, right? So now the representative of Taiwan, the ambassador of Taiwan to India, is asking for a review, and many people in Taiwan are asking for the review of One China policy, right? So Indian government should pay close heed to what the people of Taiwan are saying, because they know the best and it affects them the most, right? So I think there has been several speeches being made by Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen on this, and their foreign ministers and the ambassadors. So yes, India should, pay close attention to what Taiwan is saying on One China policy, because it affects them the most. And Indian government should consider what they're saying.
And another question that comes to mind is about the Dalai Lama, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Now, His Holiness has been in India for nearly 6 decades, and India has been home to him, as well as a very large Tibetan community. Now, it's often said that it's about time that India used the Dalai Lama card to good effect and in its favor against China. Is the time right now for India to do so?
Well, His Holiness doesn't need to be used by anyone. His Holiness himself is a global figure,
Yeah.
and he's very wise, and he's ahead of many global leaders around the world, and he has his views, and he shares it around the world, right? And I think he is one of the best ambassadors of India in advocating a Nalanda tradition, Indian secularism, right, and the greatness of India. So he has already been willingly and voluntarily being what he himself calls a proud, son of India, right? So he has already done more than anyone can ask for.
Okay, quite nicely spoken. Dr. Sangay, now let me bring you to the issue of Nepal. Nepal has been, there have been increasing Chinese inroads into Nepal and also increasing reports about the persecution of the Tibetan community in Nepal, given that Nepal serves as a bridge between Tibet and India. What reports do you get about the condition of Tibetans in Nepal?
You know, Nepal and Tibet had very long relationship and very close relationship. Our cultural heritage with the people of border of Nepal and Tibet are very similar. And historically, we enjoyed very good relationship. And on few occasions, there has been some battles or war or invasions. But generally, for centuries, we have lived peacefully, and with very cordial relationship. And if you listen to some of the old songs of Nepal, there are many songs regarding Tibet. And people of Nepal know about Tibet, more than many people around the world, right? So that was the fact. And unfortunately, in recent times, under Chinese government pressure, the Nepali government has to, adhere to or give concessions to on the issue of Tibet and Tibetan people. So the Tibetan people in Nepal are facing tremendous pressure, right? And in fact, if you look at 1990s, maybe more than half have already left Nepal and gone out to various countries around the world, and some also to India, right? So they are facing difficulties. For example, Tibetans who were born and brought up after 1990s are not even issued, residency card. So their identity also is, made unnecessarily illegal, and that their livelihood and living condition difficult, which is unfortunate.
What are your views on the national security law that China has passed for Hong Kong? There have been protests lasting for many months now, and yet China has gone and there have been protests for many months now, and yet China has gone ahead and brought in this law. Uh, does it again speak of China's aggressive and uh, muscle flexing in the region?
Yes, I think it reflects some kind of nervousness, insecurity within China. And when the whole world is very busy with this coronavirus pandemic, the virus originated in Wuhan, the city of China, which everybody knows. And I think the attention is on coronavirus, and then they quickly passed the national security law on Hong Kong, and they're going ahead and implementing it, right? So, which is in violation of one country, two system, and the basic law, which was, provided to Hong Kong and promised by the Chinese government that the basic freedom of Hong Kong will be respected, right? So, with this national security law, now there will be more regression of freedom and basic human rights of people in Hong Kong. So that's a fact. And it happened in Tibet. Whenever there is some kind of national security law is passed on the issue of Tibet, that means security prevails over human rights. So this is going to happen. So with what already happened in Tibet, it's happening in Hong Kong, which is unfortunate.
Yes. Now, let me bring you to the issue of Tibet itself. You have recently suggested, in fact, that the Chinese, if they want, they can hold a referendum in Tibet to find out whether Tibetans there want to be a part of China or they want to be autonomous. But given the Chinese expansionist tendencies and the oppression in Tibet, Do you think that the Chinese will ever carry out a referendum in the region?
Well, the Chinese government says that Tibetan
Mhm.
people in Tibet are content. They're very happy, right? If that is the case, then what we say is let's have referendum and Tibetan people in Tibet choose whether they choose to be under Chinese leaders or Tibetan people, right? Or Tibetan leaders. And we are absolutely confident that Tibetans in Tibet will vote to have Tibetan leader administer the region, right? So that's the counter argument we are making. So if Chinese government is very confident, then let's have referendum and let people in Tibet decide. Whatever they choose, we will abide by it. So we
Mhm.
are again pretty confident that the Chinese government will not hold the referendum because they will lose that referendum.
Yeah. Now, given that you've been leading the Tibetan cause for so many years, and given of late uh, the very aggressive posturing by China in the region, in the subcontinent, as well as in the South China Sea, are you still hopeful that your demands for the Tibetan people and for autonomy will ever be conceded to by Beijing?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Now, number one, the solidarity of Tibetan people inside Tibet. The younger generation sense of Tibetan identity and embracing Tibetan culture, Tibetan language, Tibetan dresses, Tibetan mindset is ever growing inside Tibet. And number two, the international awareness about the reality in Tibet is also increasing. And most importantly now, what the Chinese government is capable of, right? And how Chinese government is misleading the world on various other issues is also coming out in the open, right? Hence, the combination of all these three things, internally Tibetans in Tibet being strong, and regionally growing awareness about these incursions and the expansionist design, and awareness about Tibet and China in general at the international level, all this combined together creates an environment where Chinese government will feel the pressure and Tibetan people assert their identity. Hence, we do feel the autonomy for Tibetan people, genuine autonomy of Tibetan people, and basic right of Tibetan people will be realized.
Uh, One other question that comes to mind in the context of Tibet is it's the growing militarization of the area by the Chinese. They've been building a lot of infrastructure on the border, again, to counter India, and they've been building roads, railways, and airfields. Now, given all this, you have also said that Tibet should be made a zone of peace, but doesn't that seem like wishful thinking given the Chinese mind right now?
Now, from our side, it's not a wishful thinking. In fact, a historical reality. When Tibet was independent, when Tibet was the buffer zone between India and China, it was zone of peace. It was a demilitarized zone, and the border didn't have Indian army. Not even Indian policemen were needed to guard the border. And the travel between border of Tibet and India for Indian pilgrims to go to Mansarovar and Mount Kailash was like a free flow, right? And the
Yes.
Tibetan traders coming to India and Indian traders, and especially the, uh, you know, um, what do we call Tibetan Muslims from Kashmir area going to Tibet were all open and
Yes.
free. So for thousands of years, Tibet was zone of peace and border was demilitarized zone. So in the last only 60 plus years, it has become militarized zone, and Tibet also has been made into heavily militarized Tibetan plateau.
Yes.
So what we are saying is, let's go back to history. It's a win-win for India. It's a win-win also for China because you don't need this, incursions and tensions from all your neighboring countries.
And my final question for you, Dr. Sangay. Now that Indian and Chinese troops have been involved in a very violent physical clash in eastern Ladakh and left 20 Indian soldiers dead. Where do you see India-China ties headed?
You know, when it comes to countries like China, all the countries in the world have relationship. And relationship is part cooperation and part competition, right?
Yes.
So far, India felt there is more cooperation and less competition. But now with the border incursions, the tension is pretty clear on geopolitical factor, on economic factor, and ideological factor, authoritarianism and democracy. There, there are more competition than cooperation. So that's how India should perceive China, that there will be more competition from China on all fronts, and similarly, India should be prepared to compete with China and cooperation, where it's possible.
On that note, thank you so much, Dr. Sangay, for sparing time and talking to StratNews Global.
Thank you very much. Good to see you again.
Thank you.